Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome once again to the Bourse Report. Today, not unexpectedly, we do the second part of our review of our expectations of the budget, it being read at the end of this week on Friday by the Honorable Minister of Finance. So I wanted to touch on a few areas. What are the challenges for the Minister of Finance, and how does he extract the most out of the elbow room, limited though it might be, in order to come to some closing of that very significant fiscal gap that was budgeted for last year, somewhere in the region of about $20 billion, the difference between recurrent revenue and recurrent expenditure, which was supposed to be $59 billion, and revenues in the order of about $40 billion. Let's look at some of the areas that he can close the gap as we start today. But first, let us recap what is happening in terms of the revenues as well as the expenditures. So we need to go back and talk about this question of the revenues, which is the first graph. The revenues that have been experienced as opposed to the expenses, as you will see here, what was budgeted in terms of WTI oil price? $35. The actual average price for the 9-month period, October to June, was about $41.60. Natural gas was better than budgeted, and you would see that the total revenue for the 9-month period is $40 billion, budgeted, and the actual that was received, this is from central banks' reports, was $30 billion. So there was a significant shortfall in terms of revenues. Let's look at expenditure for the 9-month period. Budgeted, $44.25 billion. This is smoothed over the entire period for the year and the fiscal year. 9 months have gone, and budgeted was 44, actual was 36.5. So expenditure was less than budgeted. Of course, revenue on the other side was less than expected. Another area, capital expenditure, estimated to be in the order of about $8 billion. When you look back at capital expenditure, what do you see? We see in capital expenditure at a very low clip, $1.9 billion, as opposed to, on a smoothed basis for the 9-month period, $5.25 billion. Essentially, we have cut back on expenditures. We have cut back on capital expenditure. Now remember that all of these figures, government accounts on a cash accounting basis, and there may have been accruals which will not be taken up here because it would only capture the whole question of cash. Let's go next now to the other area, which was estimated in the Heritage and Stabilization drawdowns in the order of $1 billion in this fiscal year. It is only $3.375 billion. So this gives you a scale of what's been happening, what are the pluses and minuses. And let's look at what has been the breakdown, the sectoral breakdown of government expenditure. 2015 full year, 9 months, June 2016. And what you are seeing is the major area, transfers and subsidies, which is about half the overall expenditure. You see for the 9-month periods, transfers and subsidies up to about 57% of the overall expenditure. Two other areas I want to point out to you. Wages, 19% as opposed to 17% in 2015. And very significantly, capital expenditure, which is about 12, 13, 14% of the budget, 14 in 2015, 5%. So capital expenditure is down. Expect when capital expenditure is down, what happens, it does cause some exacerbation in terms of the GDP decline. This is a picture of what is happening. And let's now look at what are some of the areas that the Honorable Minister can choose to close the gap. Divestment. Apart from the revenue enhancement and expenditure adjustment, one of the areas to close the gap, divestment. Not much has been said about that this year. There was talk about the HMB-TTMF merger. That seems to be further down the horizon, I do not expect that it is going to happen to give the kind of kick to the revenue side for the government in divestment. National enterprise is very interesting. Government continues to own through Corporation Sole and the NGC about 83% of the NFM, National Energy Limited, issue. If they choose to divest and retain control of 51%, our estimates are they can generate $1.72 billion. And further to which, National Energy Corporation has a large cohort of US dollar investments that can generate US dollars. So it can also help with balance of payments if oil is not sold into the local market. And if divestment takes place, if you take out that US dollar cohort, this is Tringen, this is NGL, this is LNG components that it owns. And this can help to contribute to the balance of payments situation, which is at a declining pace. First Citizens, there has been talk about another 20% or so. You can generate additional income from that. Let's go now to some of the other areas. In terms of borrowing, of course, we have seen borrowing. We have seen the $1 billion US in borrowing at right now that asset is trading at 4.05%. So stands to reason that government can borrow on the international market without further decline in its credit rating at about 4 to 4.5% or thereabouts. And therefore, borrowing is possible if the deterioration does not continue. Let's look very closely at what's happening with the balance of payments, the current account. When you look here to this right here, 2013, 2014, 2015, what you are seeing, that's red line, exports. Exports falling. Expected. But exports are falling at a greater rate than imports, which seems to be leveling out. So what is happening is that the contribution, the retention of reserves and so on would be falling away because of lower exports, and the rate of imports has not fallen correspondingly. Let's go then very quickly and see what's happening with the next graph where we talk about the current account. What you see with the current accounts is, which really speaks to how much retention we are achieving with regard to hard currency. What you see here is a negative position of $1.5 billion in the overall balance of payments and a $0.1 billion. What has contributed to that? One, in terms of what has helped to stay that decline, is the US dollar $1 billion borrowing, which contributes to the reserves and to the balance of payment situation, as well as a drawdown in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, $0.375 billion. What I want to say, one, there are other aspects that can contribute, and this is the CLICO and the recollection of loans. Trinidad Generation, TGU Unlimited, there is the capacity to recall some of those treasury loans, and as well what happens with regard to collection in terms of the CLICO bonds and in terms of the investments and placements of funds in CLICO to come back. These are the various areas that the minister can push on. Borrowing, one. Two, divestment. Three, the possibility of the using currency as a tool to adjust the currency levels and then the flows. These are some of the things we'll talk about. Look for us on our website, which gives far more details at boursinvestment.com. And look for our prices, mutual funds under Bourse and Save Invest in the newspapers. Have yourself a wonderful investment week. I'll be on later in the week to talk in more detail about the budgeted situation which comes up on Friday. This is Subhash Ram Kilawan for the Bourse Report, and we go back straight to him.